Good afternoon, Keith Tebow from FRC Media. Thank you for joining us. As we head to the September 6th state primary, we're trying to speak to as many candidates as possible to give you informed choices when you go to the ballot box. I'm joined right now by Senator Eric Lesser. He is a Democratic candidate running for Lieutenant Governor in the Democratic primary on September 6th. Senator, thank you for joining me, and welcome to Fall River. I know you've been here many times.
Hi, thanks for having me, Keith.
You know, a lot of times when I've been speaking to many of the statewide candidates, unless they're from the South Coast, people don't know who Eric Lesser is.
Right,
so fill people in on who you are and why you want to be the next Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Eric Lesser, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. People can actually vote right now by mail.
Right.
There's also going to be early votes starting next week, and of course the primary on September 6th. So again, I'm State Senator Eric Lesser. I'm in my 4th term in the State Senate. I've been serving for 8 years. And I chair our Committee on Economic Development, which is very important for Fall River. Oversees economic development projects, workforce training programs, many of our housing programs, municipal infrastructure. And I've actually spent the day touring around New Bedford, and I'm going to be spending some time with your State Senator, Michael Rodericks, today, who I'm proud to have the support of in this race. The thing that I also want to get across is the region of the state I come from in Western Mass, the greater Springfield area, is really very similar in a lot of ways to the South Coast. An industrial area, an area where people largely work in manufacturing, and an area that frankly has had to fight for resources and attention from Boston and from Beacon Hill. And one of the most important things I want to bring to the table as Lieutenant Governor is the perspective of someone from our regions outside of Beacon Hill, because I think you can appreciate here in the South Coast area how important that perspective is and how much it's really needed to have an executive team, a governor and a lieutenant governor, that really speak for the whole state.
You know, that has been my question to most of the statewide candidates I spoke with. You know, people on the South Coast, people in Western Mass will often say, well, Boston, they don't care about us, right?
Yeah.
So as Lieutenant Governor, talk a little bit more about some of the policies, and we'll get into some specifics, but some of the policies as Lieutenant Governor you'd like to see that would potentially impact the South Coast.
Yeah, so just a few things. So first off, I'm the chair of as I mentioned, our Committee on Economic Development. I also am the head of our Manufacturing Caucus and our Gateway Cities Caucus. The reason I bring this up, Keith, is because so many of the things I want to champion as Lieutenant Governor are really important for Fall River. Just one example, I want to pledge to close the wait list at our vocational schools. I think this is so important to invest in voc ed, to work on better job training programs for people of all ages. And another very important issue is housing. You know, I think we're all proud of Massachusetts. We love living here. There's incredible assets here. There's incredible things happening. But it's too expensive. People can't afford it. The housing is going up and up, rents are going up, and transportation is really lacking for a state as advanced as us. We're watching, of course, on the news the issues with the T, right, the Orange Line, the safety issues, the Orange Line shut down for 30 days. One of the perspectives I bring as somebody from Western Mass, from the Springfield area, is let's invest in transportation for our whole state. So one of the chief things I've been working on is connecting our state by high-speed rail, from Pittsfield through Springfield, through Worcester to Boston. This project would be important even for Fall River because it would be the single biggest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in our state's history, taking thousands of cars off the road. It would help connect people to homes they can afford, taking on the housing price issues we've got. And it would create thousands and thousands of really good, really high quality jobs. And we've got to stay focused on South Coast Rail and the potential that has for really transforming the region for the better, connecting people in Fall River and Taunton and New Bedford to all of the innovation, all of the wealth, all of the job opportunities that you've got in the Boston area, and vice versa, by the way. We want to help expose all the great things happening here to the decision makers on Beacon Hill and in Boston as well.
You know, it's interesting. I remember I've been in the media for well over 30 years. I remember Governor Weld saying South Coast Rail is going to happen, and now it's going to be a reality. You go to the train depot not too far from here, and it's coming up, and by the end of next year we'll have that connection, that rail connection to Boston. Now the role of the Lieutenant Governor is pretty well defined, right? You sit in for the place of the governor when he or she is out of the state. You also chair the Governor's Council. One of the things that we hear a lot of, even in Fall River, with current Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito is that connection between the cities and the executive branch. I know Mayor Coogan here has said on many occasions he appreciated he can pick up the phone and call Lieutenant Governor Polito to make that connection. How do you look to continue that and even build upon that?
Yeah, well, it's a very important part of the role. You're really like the constituent services director in chief. You know, the governor is up here, you know, setting the agenda, setting the vision. The lieutenant governor, when they're doing the job best, is really kind of in the engine room of state government, you know, helping solve problems, helping move agendas forward, helping stay connected to legislators, to mayors, to city councilors, town administrators across the state. Keith, I think my experience is actually uniquely suited for that role. For people who might not be familiar with the area of the state I come from, the greater Springfield area and my Senate district is really diverse in every sense. I have some of the densest urban communities in the state. I have 2 cities that I represent, Springfield and Chicopee, and I have a town without a stoplight. And I've got everything in between. So one of the things you learn in a role like that is, you know, how you stay in touch with communities that have different needs, different requirements, different dynamics, different economies, different local populations. But Keith, I can tell you this. One thing I found both from my travels within my own Senate district, but most importantly now from my travels across the state, is as different as these different communities are, there is one thing I do hear in common, which is people are increasingly concerned that their kids and their grandkids will have the same opportunity and potential that they had. And that's really the heart of the job as lieutenant governor. You've got to be out there communicating with people. You've got to be out there helping solve problems. Another element of this, Keith, that I think I could really offer some help. The lieutenant governor is really the only position, aside from the governor, of course, that can work across disciplines in state government. If you think about it, each cabinet secretary has their own area of expertise and oversight. Each other constitutional officer has areas that they focus on. The lieutenant governor can work across disciplines and can work across governments, working with the federal government, federal partners, state government, local government, and then within those various governments, working across disciplines. So let's take an example. You know, the investments, the investments in the transformations that are happening at the waterfront. That's an important example of obviously local officials have a say. There's an important federal dimension because there's EPA considerations, there's a NOAA considerations, you have a lot of different moving pieces, federal grants and funds that are coming in, and of course there's a big state component. And there's also a private sector component, the business community, the nonprofits, the community groups. A lieutenant governor can help bring all those different components around the table and help solve those big problems. Just a really concrete example of this from recent history was the work Tim Murray did to help get Worcester-Boston rail service improved. Again, that was a project that required working with city officials, working with the federal government on the rail, and also working, of course, with the state government, the MBTA and MassDOT and others.
Yeah. Unlike on the Republican side, where the lieutenant governor candidates sort of have attached themselves to one of the gubernatorial candidates, in this race, you've got 3 of you running for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. Also running is Salem Mayor Kim Driscoll and State Representative Tami Gouveia running on the Democratic side. You got really one candidate for on the Democrats, that's Attorney General Maura Healey, even though there's another candidate on the ballot, even though she dropped out. So what's been your relationship with the Attorney General, and how do you feel that role will be? Because she has obviously been quiet about who she would like to see be the lieutenant governor.
Well, great question, Keith, because at the end of the day, the job of lieutenant governor is to be the lieutenant to the governor. The governor sets the agenda, the governor sets the vision, the lieutenant governor is there to support that vision and help implement it. And I have the track record. I would argue I'm the only candidate in this race with a substantive track record on some of the highest stakes issues in our state of working with Attorney General Healey and then one day soon working with Governor Healey. Just a couple of examples, Keith. At the height of the opioid crisis back in 2015, I worked with the Attorney General Healey, to set up a bulk purchasing law for Narcan. Narcan, of course, is the drug that reverses an overdose. If a police officer, a school nurse, a firefighter shows up at the scene of an overdose and has Narcan, the person is likely to live. If they show up and they don't have Narcan, the person is unlikely to live. That program helped get thousands of doses of Narcan into the hands of our local communities and has saved hundreds of lives. Another very big, very important policy that Attorney General Healy and I have worked on together is the Student Loan Borrower Bill of Rights. Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump tried to stop it. We passed a law in Massachusetts. It took more than 5 years to get it done. That creates a new licensing and new consumer protection for student loan borrowers. 800,000 people in Massachusetts have student loans and are benefiting from that law. Attorney General Healy and I worked on it together, and her office is now implementing it. So I have the track record of working with her, and I think a very important part of the job, obviously the most important part of the job, is being able to work with the governor, and very importantly, being that implementer, being that person who helps the governor's administration get policy done.
Do you foresee any opportunity for you as Lieutenant Governor to maybe provide some friendly advice to the governor in terms of policies that you may like to see that she may not necessarily be in tune with, but maybe there's some compromise?
Well, of course. I think that's a really important part of the role. And I think actually I lend a unique perspective there coming from Western Mass. Right. I am the only candidate, Keith, from outside 495 for running for Lieutenant Governor. I'm also the only candidate on any ballot line: Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Auditor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, up and down, that comes from outside 495. And that's an important perspective, the perspective of representing two gateway cities, of representing rural communities, of representing communities that are far away from good transit access, communities that have frankly not kept pace with the economic growth you've seen in certain parts of the Metro Boston area. So I do think that that's a really important perspective. The other thing I would offer there, Keith, is I'm the only candidate with federal experience. I worked for 4 years for President Obama. I worked 40 feet from the front door of his Oval Office as the assistant to David Axelrod, who was the president's senior advisor. I think I'm going to be able to be a good counselor to Governor Healy on issues that intersect with the federal government, on issues having to do with our regions and Western Mass. And not to go long, but if you look at the successful pairs, the successful administrations of recent years, they've understood this importance of geographic balance. Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito from Shrewsbury, Governor Patrick and Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray from Worcester, Governor Salucci and Lieutenant Governor Jane Swift from Williamstown, and even Governor Weld, who was from Cambridge, had Lieutenant Governor Salucci, who was from Hudson. So it's important to have that perspective.
Yeah. The other role of the Lieutenant Governor is to chair the Governor's Council, which is very instrumental in appointing judges and other members that really can play a big role in the future. How do you see that role? And is there a way that, a lot of people will see, well, if there's a Democratic Lieutenant Governor and Governor, then, there's a fear that maybe more liberal judges will be appointed. How do you try to, as in that role, to strike a balance in terms of making sure that the judiciary is fair?
Yeah, so this is a very important role of the Lieutenant Governor chairing the Governor's Council. It's actually written in the Massachusetts Constitution that the Lieutenant Governor chair the Governor's Council. For people who might not be familiar with this body, it's a group of duly elected officials from across the state who are asked to confirm judges appointed by the governor. They also are asked to confirm or approve pardons and commutations. It works in a similar way to how the U.S. Senate, for example, works with federal nominations. I think I'm uniquely suited to this role, Keith, for a few reasons. I'm an attorney. I have a Harvard Law degree. I'm the vice chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And when I worked for President Obama, I was involved in 2 Supreme Court nominations for Sonia Sotomayor and for Elena Kagan. And I think one of the things I'd like to prioritize as chairing the Governor's Council is diversity on our bench in every sense. We need more racial diversity. We need more gender diversity. Something that I think is very important for the South Coast and Fall River is geographic diversity of our judges. I can appreciate this as a Western Mass guy, but there was a period of time when, for example, the SJC really only had judges from right within the Metro Boston area. That's not fair. That locks whole regions out of representation. The other thing I'd like to see, Keith, and this goes to your point about kind of diversity of viewpoints and perspectives, is I'd like to see more diversity of experience. We need to see more public interest lawyers. We need to see more environmental attorneys. We need to see more civil rights attorneys serving as judges in our state.
You know, a lot of the issues that are brought up in this race in many ways dovetail what Maura Healey will be talking about in the gubernatorial candidates in terms of quality of life issues, right? Dealing with inflation, housing, you mentioned housing earlier, you know, climate change. How can a lieutenant governor help, again, either help foster the role of the interests of the governor, or even bring his or her own experience into some of those issues that are, you know, what a lot of people will go to vote for, right?
Right.
You know, pocketbook issues, as they call it.
Well, first, I think that this election is about those pocketbook issues. People are hurting right now. We are in an unprecedented economic situation. We have the highest inflation in over 40 years. We're seeing double-digit increases year after year on housing, which is pricing people out. Something we didn't discuss yet, Keith, but is a big source of stress for people is childcare, right. And childcare costs, which continue to escalate. And again, I think that the set of experiences I have, having worked for President Obama on the federal level, representing a region very similar to the South Coast in Western Mass in the Pioneer Valley, and the perspective of somebody who's worked substantively at the State House on some of the highest stakes issues in front of us. We just passed a historic climate change law. You referenced
Right.
the environmental challenges. We just passed a really groundbreaking mental health bill that's going to require insurance companies to pay for mental health screenings for patients every year. This is really important work that's really groundbreaking and path-breaking. We did a very important patch to the Bruin decision for gun safety. And I think I've got the experience and I've got the perspective I can offer to Governor Healey to help take on these challenges.
You know, another role that we often see the lieutenant governor partake is, you know, working with the legislature. You know, sort of that liaison again. We talk about the liaison with cities and towns, but also the legislature. You're one of two legislators running for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. Actually, on the Republican side, both former legislators. How do you view that role, knowing the nuts and bolts of what happens in the Senate, at least, on how, you know, to get things passed, if you happen to be representing the interests of the governor?
It's a very important part of the job, and I think a piece of the job that I could really contribute to. I'm the only candidate in the race with high-level legislative experience. I chair one of the highest profile committees, the Committee on Economic Development. I've been involved in multiple conference committees, including some of the highest stakes ones we've had, the 5-year extension of Governor Patrick's Life Sciences Initiative, the COVID rescue package. My colleagues in the Senate turned to me to help negotiate and write the COVID rescue package that we did in 2020. We did a very important revision to non-compete agreements. Sports betting. I was part of the team that got sports betting done in the wee hours of the final days of session. So I think that this is really an important area that I can offer support to. And at the end of the day, you know, there's immense power and authority in the executive branch itself, in terms of regulatory authority, in terms of, you know, oversight of personnel, state agencies, but a lot of the proactive things we want to do, whether it's around transportation, whether it's around climate, whether it's around housing, whether it's around job training and economic development, do have to come through the legislature. So having that legislative experience, I think, is really important.
I did have the opportunity to view the debate that was held last week with WGBH and Channel 5 and the Boston Globe. The three of you, Lieutenant Governor candidates, talking about the issues. Many times in a primary, a lot of the issues there appears to be on, like in the Democrats, appear to be some common ground, right? There tends to be more of a difference when it's Republican and Democrat. But there is some differences between the three of you. How do you differentiate yourself between Representative Gouveia and Mayor Driscoll as you're talking to primary voters?
Well, as I mentioned, the experience is very different. I'm the only candidate with federal experience. I'm the only candidate that comes from an underserved region. I'm the only candidate with high-level legislative experience. And I think those are important. And I think that it informs and helps shape your approach to these issues. And so, I'm also the only candidate that's really centered and focused on transportation, especially transportation for our outlying regions, South Coast, Western Mass, Central Mass, Merrimack Valley, right. Cape Cod, that is going to really be important as we move forward.
So is that also, we have obviously the Southeastern Regional Transit Authority here. I spoke to a candidate who was interested in running last year, dropped out, never ran, but his big pitch was also transportation and making it more affordable, more convenient. How would you do that as Lieutenant Governor?
So our regional transit authorities, I'm glad you brought that up, need our attention and unfortunately have really suffered from a lack of focus, a lack of attention, a lack of investment at the State House. I am a member of our Regional Transit Authorities caucus. I represent the largest regional transit authority, the PVTA, which serves the entire Pioneer Valley region. And multiple large communities: Amherst, Northampton, Holyoke, Springfield, Chicopee, and everywhere in between, Westfield. And so one of the things we found, Keith, is it's a fight every year to secure funding for them, to provide investment for them. They have very little discretionary space in their budgets to do innovation, to experiment with new options, to expand service, let alone, it's a struggle for them just to keep the lines open that they already have. Yeah. So I think, again, one of the perspectives I can give as Lieutenant Governor is reminding people, hey, we have regional transit authorities. We have transit services on the South Coast. We have transit services on the Cape. We have transit services on the Merrimack Valley, on Cape Cod, and Metro West. And we need to be focusing on that. And we need more innovation in those services. Yeah. Things like more on-demand ride sharing, more on-demand point-to-point services, more flexible scheduling, especially as people's work habits change with COVID. Yeah. And I think that that's a really important piece of this.
As we wrap up, I want to give you a couple of extra minutes to speak directly to the Democratic voters of Fall River on why they should consider Eric Lesser to be the next Lieutenant Governor.
Well, hello, residents of Fall River. Thanks so much for tuning in for a little bit and hearing what I have to say. Just a reminder that you can vote in person, early voting next week. You can also, of course, vote on Election Day, the Tuesday after Labor Day, September 6th, or you can vote by mail any day before that. And I just want to ask for your vote, ask for your support. Lieutenant Governor is a very important role. I have the experience of working with Governor Healy on some of the highest stakes issues in our state, including taking on the opioid crisis and taking on the student debt crisis. And I come from a region very similar to yours. I come from Western Mass, from the greater Springfield area. I represent two gateway cities with very similar dynamics and challenges and opportunities to Fall River, Springfield and Chicopee, and some rural communities as well, similar to the communities you've got here on the South Coast. I think it's time to have an executive team that really focuses on and works to center our regions that we know sometimes struggle to get attention on Beacon Hill. So I ask for your support, I ask for your vote, and don't forget to vote on September 6th.
Senator Eric Lesser, candidate for Lieutenant Governor, thank you for your time. Yeah. And when you're successful, we'll get you on again between now and November.
Absolutely.
Next time you're in Fall River.
Looking forward to it.
All right. And thank you for joining us here on FRC Media, and please make a point to vote on Tuesday, September 6th.